Tony Blair says he's found a new political theory which will position him to govern from what he calls the radical center. He expects it to help him win an election tomorrow by a double-digit margin. Tomorrow's general election in the United Kingdom pits Blair against Prime Minister John Major. Although Blair renamed his party New Labour, many observers are questioning whether or not he has any new ideas, nor do they know exactly how this election will turn out. Joining me now for a consideration of the question of what's going on in Great Britain, Harold Evans, a former editor of British daily newspapers, now the publisher and president of Random House. Christopher Hitchens contributes to Vanity Fair and The Nation magazines. Quentin Letts is the New York bureau chief for the Times of London. And for the Americans, Joe Klein of the New Yorker magazine, who recently returned from covering the campaign. Harry Evans, tell me what you think is going to happen in this election.
Well, I think Blair's going to win because the opinion polls say so, and we've advanced since the Truman-Dewey days. So that's, I think, a pretty safe bet.
And the margin is wide enough.
Yeah, and I hope it comes true because I think Blair is essential for Britain, and it's essential that the Labour Party is returned to government after 18 years, at the end of which the Conservative Party has become corrupt and dissolute and has nothing to offer, basically, except a kind of erratic management.
Anybody disagree with that in terms of...
I disagree slightly. I think this whole corruption thing's perhaps been overplayed. I think this is what happens in modern Western democracies when you have anyone in government, and such is the media spotlight on you these days, that any government is going to look a bit seedy after a bit, and I dare say in the first few days of the Labour government, which seems likely to happen, the wheels will come spinning right off, and it's going to be very entertaining to watch.
If that was the case, you'd have had this kind of corruption in Britain before, but the wholesale selling of parliamentary questions, for example, is a relatively new racket, is it?
I can see that was a pretty manky operation.
Let me come to Joe, who's there covering it and having covered a lot of American campaigns. Tell me, first of all, the experience of covering a British election.
Same. Yeah.
Even though it's shortened, even though it's...
You know, in the past year, it is shortened, which makes it more sane, and also there are no television advertisements. But the day-to-day life on the bus, I've covered campaigns in the past year in Taiwan, Russia, Israel, here, and Britain. Same. Everybody has a war room now. Everybody has spin doctors. Bibi Netanyahu had spin doctors.
This is because they all read books about the 92 election.
We have corrupted the world of politics.
Yeah. Which raises the question about, is anybody from the Clinton administration advising Tony Blair? Anybody there?
Yeah, Stan Greenberg,
the pollster.
The pollster has been advising Blair.
Is George Stephanopoulos doing anything?
I think, I heard that. I don't know for a fact that he is.
Yeah. But there's been lots of crossover.
Yeah, you want to point out that the Conservative Party sent over people in the Bush v. Clinton election to try and get Bush elected.
And that's why Bush lost.
A lot of massive... Yes, it's a very good point.
They sent political people over here to help George Bush?
Yes, they also tried to break into the files on Clinton's passport in London, if you remember, for a destabilisation job for which Clinton's never forgiven Major to this day.
They contributed, the Conservative Party contributed to a mésalliance to destroy the special relationship and did great damage to the relationship between Britain and the United States, which are very, very important, not least on the question of Ireland.
I want to come back to the campaign in a second, but tell me who Tony Blair is and what Americans ought to know about him and how much of him reminds you of Bill Clinton, as is often said.
Joe Klein was always entertaining and insightful, and is a brilliant author. I thought
and the name of the book was Primary Colors?
And the name of the book was Primary Colors, but in the New Yorker piece, I thought he got it wrong, because I don't think he's as similar to Clinton as Joe suggested. There's big differences between them. First of all, historically, Clinton has never done what Tony Blair has done to show the enormous toughness to reform the Labour Party in ways which some people may not like.
Secondly,
I did say that in the piece.
I know, but I think you should have made more of it. And
because he's jealous because I'm young enough to have been old Labour. And old enough to have been...
And you vehemently object to New Labour?
I'm old enough to have been New Left as well, so that's my story.
But I think the difference with Blair is that he's not nearly, not pretending to be nearly as left-wing on the eve of power, whereas Clinton was promising various left-wing things, and then, as Robert Reich pointed out in his book, completely reneged on that, and then shifted to the centre in office.
In fact, there are profound differences in the way, well, it depends on which Clinton you want. The 1992 version of Clinton made a lot of promises. The 1996 version didn't make that many. Tony Blair isn't making any promises at all, which is why it's kind of difficult to tell whether this is a crucial election or not, because it's impossible to know what he's going to do the day after.
But is he, in your judgment, changing? Does he represent a new Labour? I mean, is he wanting to, beyond winning an election, change the nature of the Labour Party?
I think he already has. I think that what Harry says is absolutely true. I mean, they're no longer a socialist party. They're now kind of in the mushy.
Sorry about that, Christopher.
I know, but let me just come in on this, because it's now a commonplace that Blair's not promising anything. And Joe, with his incandescent prose style, made that more convincing, when in fact it's not true. Let me just give you some examples, which are very important for radical centrism. The Conservative Party has been...
Remind the audience is what Blair says he is.
All right. In terms of
radical centrism, an older idea than socialism.
Okay, in terms of civil liberties, which are very important, the European Convention on Human Rights, in which I've had some part with, is very, very important in England for the guarding of civil liberties. The British government under the Conservatives has had more breaches of human rights than any single government in the history of the convention. 49 breaches, 12 in the last 2 years. It's got the worst record of all. Tony Blair...
Wait a minute. To investigate a lot of countries are far,
yeah, but just the point. Let me just get to the specific... Let me get to the specific point. Tony Blair has promised to incorporate the European Convention on Human Rights into the British Constitution. That's as important as the Bill of Rights in the American Constitution. That's profound. That's not vacuous. Secondly, he's promised constitutional reform, giving more say to Wales and Scotland, to reform the archaic House of Lords. That's very specific. 3, he's willing to sign the social contract in Europe, which gives the minimum wage. That's not vacuous. Those are specific promises which will make a... Whatever it's a disaster for British, I don't agree, it nonetheless will make a profound difference to British life.
Oh yeah, there are real issues here, but the problem is very few of these issues are actually being talked about during the election campaign, and all people are talking about are the personalities of the two party leaders.
Well,
and so it's become an extremely boring toothpaste advertisement, commercial versus
so
commercial.
Does Tony Blair, if he wins, have a mandate to govern in terms of the vote that he gets?
Yes, he's likely to get possibly a very large majority.
100 seats?
Yeah, I mean, you remember Custer's last stand. Custer must have been feeling roughly the same way as John Major feels now. All those Indians running around.
So what can Tony Blair wake up the next day and say, the people of the United Kingdom have elected me to do the following things? What?
Yes, to dismantle the United Kingdom is one of the main things, so
Scotland
that Scotland and Wales arguably will be in a better position to have independence eventually, and that could be a very damaging business altogether.
Only if the European context holds. I mean, actually, I agree with funnily enough, with both Harry and Joe. I mean, it has been a vacuous campaign, and he, in many ways, is a vacuous politician. But there is a posthumous victory for the left here. In the last Labour government, people like Tony Benn used to say, OK, if you're not going to tax anymore, you're not going to spend anymore, do some things that don't cost any money. Abolish the House of Lords. Give autonomy to Scotland and Wales. Improve civil liberties. These are not expensive things to do, and prepare, in fact, for Britain to become what it will be, I think, very soon, namely a republic. Though Blair won't have the guts to say so.
You were objecting. You want to get in?
No, I was just going to say that most victories for the left do turn out to be posthumous these days.
or oblique.
But the irony is that the kind of power that Blair proposes to give to Scotland and Wales is called in this country devolution, and is a very conservative idea. I think that
devolution meaning handing power down to the states up to the Lord.
I think that it's not as important as Harry thinks it is, and maybe not as unimportant as you think it is. But it isn't a central issue like control of the economy, which might have been, which has been the central issue in British politics.
So how specific could you get? Here's a future Prime Minister, I like to think, Tony Blair, who has said, we're committing a promise on taxes, which is phenomenal, that we're not going to raise the level of taxation. Secondly, he said the level of public spending of the Conservative Party...
Well,
that's right. You might raise the VAT.
All right.
And the point has to be made about that. If you're not going to raise taxation, how are you going to have the money to achieve all these highfalutin things that you intend to do?
He hasn't committed. I'm not. You're saying me. I'm not intending to do anything. I'm just sitting here. I know you are.
Are you being backfooted at this moment?
Vigorous Labour supporter.
No, but I want to get to Joe, because in terms of macroeconomic management, those two commitments do restrict him, as you rightly say, but I'm getting to this point that he's been vacuous. He's not. He's been specific. He's been very honest. And Joe, I give Joe.
But Joe's not the only reporter who has suggested that. I've read 1,000 reporters who suggested that.
It's purposeful vacuity. It is. I called it a magisterial vacuity because I think he understands it's the only way that he could have credibility with the British public at this point would be to not make grand promises.
Why would making
promises?
Oh, I see. Promises
in the manner of the old
left. As usual.
And after all, here's a party in power that cannot safeguard the emblematic national nosh. I mean, it can't be trusted with the beef. You know, this is it's no small thing. I mean, it's a lot of the spade work's been done, so to speak.
Gary Hart lives.
Also, you know, there's a threshold question here. I mean, just like the threshold question in our election last year was Bob Dole's age. People looked at him, they said, he's too old, I don't want to vote for him. People look at the Tories and say, they've been in power for 18 years, we're sick of them, we want something new.
But here's what else you hear. You hear that this election, if Tony Blair wins, is still an affirmation of Thatcher.
Absolutely. This is, I mean, we talk about posthumous Labour victories. It's nonsense. It's a posthumous Thatcherite victory, in a sense, in that she changed the landscape, to use a cliche, so much that everyone is now scurrying after her skirtings, and they're desperate to try and prove themselves. I'm more right-wing than you. That's really what the name of the game is now.
I think that she may well be the queen of the radical centre. If you use a transatlantic political spectrum.
She's the monarch of the radical centre.
It's confusing. She's in the centre.
Oh, she is. I mean, the European social welfare states are on the left.
Running on her Euro
Exactly not, no. Blair and Thatcher on Europe are very, very different. She hated Europe so much, and yet Blair is committed to certain aspects of Europe which she would run a mile from. Secondly, Blair is committed to things, I say, like the minimum wage, which you think is going to ruin British business, but which Mrs. Thatcher would never have accepted. So I agree with you. She's certainly moved the economy and the political things in a certain direction, and that's right. And he's picked up on that. But here's the point. And many people forget, they say Britain economy is booming. So it is, but there's a massive area of unemployment in the country, dark areas where I used to work.
It's much lower than anywhere else in Europe.
Well,
it is. It's the lowest unemployment rate in Europe, for goodness sake. And these are problems of Europe much more than they are of Britain.
In terms of our place in the national economy, we are now 22nd in the income tables in Europe, in the world, 22nd. Britain, just think of that, the 27th richest country. Not the second or the third or the fourth, the 22nd. That's because of the way the Conservatives have neglected the strength of the whole economy and concentrated on the southeast.
Is it possible, I'm going to name drop just for 1 second. I happened to sit next to Mrs. Thatcher at dinner in New York, and I said to her, if Blair...
Baroness Thatcher.
I know, Baroness Thatcher to me, right. And I said to her, what do you worry about if Tony Blair comes to power? He's moving to the right. And she said, what I worry about, my boy, is I worry about the fact that once he gets power, he's going to listen to all these other people and he's going to turn back to the old Labour.
I think the real problem is going to be when he gets into power, he's going to face the same problem as any modern Western leader these days. What on earth can I do to make myself memorable to history? And this is a problem which Mr. Clinton has got, and it's a problem that many of the Western leaders have got. We live in very uninteresting times, and that is a political curse.
With no war, it's hard to be great?
Well, no, what they really want to do is some
crisis.
great scheme. They want to have some enormous scheme which they can name after themselves and be remembered by. And they don't have that because, on the whole, life is fairly peaceful. And life, despite Harry's gloom-mongering, is actually not that bad in Britain. People are fairly comfortable, despite all this.
And the reason, then, that Tories are in such disrespect in terms of the electorate, if we believe the polls, is because of corruption or because you've had long enough...
No, because having done all this, and having failed to safeguard even the beef, they did something much worse than that, which was to try to blame their troubles on foreigners. And in the
immigrants?
Partly on immigrants, but on their fellow Europeans.
All right, the issue of sovereignty.
And the reason why Mr. Major will go down, not just to defeat, but to ignominy in history, is in the last days of the campaign, he threw in his lot, with the, confusing my lots, with the worst lot in his party, the chauvinists and xenophobes. In the attempt to save his campaign, and said it's all the fault of the Krauts and the Frogs and the Wops and the Wogs that we're in such trouble. And what I hope will distinguish this campaign, therefore, is that will be discredited as a tactic from now on. It will do for Europhobia what Enoch Powell did for anti-immigrant feeling. It'll mean no one of any principle ever tries it again, and that would be an achievement.
He will taint it with what? He will taint it
with failure and diminishing returns and opportunism.
I mean, you talk about
there are
what's
pretty
bad.
serious doubts throughout Britain, not just in Conservative circles, but in the Labour Party as well. A lot of those people you're talking about, a lot of those Euro-sceptics, as we call them, the people who don't like Europe,
they call themselves.
A lot of them are socialists as well. So I don't think it's quite as simple as Christopher makes
the
out.
way
And the big European
the way
question.
that Major capitulated to it, there was the basest kind of opportunism. Everybody knows that until 3 weeks ago he didn't think that.
You talk about bad for British business. Isolating the British business community from Europe is bad for British business.
Right. Let me talk about good for the United States. What difference will it make for the Atlantic Alliance, for the special relationship that Tony Blair
there's
is
such,
elected
yeah.
Prime Minister. Sorry.
I think there's the special relationship went when Churchill died. I think it's complete baloney. That's
Well,
still around.
Macmillan
And I think
and
the whole
Kennedy, yeah.
the whole sort of disintegration of the American unity as a society, with all the subsets, the various ethnic groups having so much political power in this country, has effectively wiped out any special relationship. Washington isn't really interested in London.
So who's in power in London and who's in power in 10 Downing and who's in power at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue doesn't make any difference in terms of where the two great countries go?
Clinton and Blair are men of similar kidney, and I imagine they might get
Similar
on better.
kidney?
Yes, they might get on better than Mr. Major and Mr. Clinton. They don't get on very well.
Harry, what do you expect Tony Blair, if he wins, to do in the first 6 months of his administration?
Govern, basically, and manage. And I expect him to be quite cautious on initiatives. And the 100 days is one of the curses that politicians have. And my guess is he'll try and avoid the 100 days syndrome, which is an invention of journalism to destroy politicians.
Much has been said about this, or much has been written in some periodicals in the United States. Is there something about sort of with Tony Blair among people who've lived and worked and grew up in Britain as you did, that this is a kind of Camelot, and this is, in a sense, even, you know, and so therefore people want to go back to London and be involved in something like this?
Well, I'm not talking about going back to London because I'm in the United States, but it certainly is attractive to have somebody who's articulate, who comes from that generation. And I don't hold it against him that he went to Oxford University, as some people do. He went to Oxford University.
Someone's got to go to Oxford.
I went to a working man's university in the northeast, a coal mining university. And by God, it was hard.
University of Life, BA failed.
But he has a very attractive personality, and I think the Conservatives made a big mistake focusing on the fact that he smiles a lot.
Oh, they make fun of him because he smiles, or they say it? Yeah, that was Jimmy Carter smiled a lot in his campaign. Joe.
He has an unfortunate smile. I mean, it's not that he smiles so much, but he smiles so badly.
It's like Bugs Bunny is sitting on a carrot.
But look, this New Frontier stuff and its English analogues have all been tried before. Harold Wilson became Prime Minister, Labour Prime Minister, in 1964 on the backwash of the Kennedy New Frontier stuff, borrowing the same rhetoric, white heat of technological revolution, forging a new nation, all that stuff. This vital centre stuff also is very, very, very old hat. Blair's
the radical centre and vital centre,
the
same thing.
the same. The Schlesinger's slogan, translated for English and mid-Atlantic terms. The thing is, old Labour was never called old Labour; it was just called Labour, so it didn't date. New Labour will date like yesterday's newspapers. I mean, they're stuck now with a name that's going straight out of date. And I agree with whoever it was of us, this great panel, that said that it will be very hard to think of what the encore will be.
Your affection for Blair is only overcome by, I mean, is only enthusiastic in comparison for your disdain for Major.
I hate the people who practice and profit by the postmodern politics, where politics is taken out of politics. Yeah, where there are no principles, where there are no issues, where everything
Where is the politics? Where is the
management.
politics that you remember with nostalgia practiced today?
That's a very good point.
China,
Not
Vietnam.
China. I mean, they don't have China.
The last Albanian elections were pretty punchy, I must say.
Albania's gone.
Let me talk about the alignment. Rupert Murdoch.
Actually, in Italy, Italian elections, including the ones this week, are still conducted very much on the basis of participation, argument, large turnout, ideological disagreement, and so on. Yes, and the Berlusconi moment, where everything suddenly seemed to be all TV and decaf, was a very brief one and went pop, as the Blair one will.
As the Blair one will?
Will, of course, yeah.
Let me just hear out you.
There's a famous fruit called the medlar that is useless because it goes rotten before it gets ripe.
Why is it you think that Blair will fall of his own weight so quickly?
I don't think he will fall of his own weight. I think that his message is already stale. The message of novelty and so on.
So what are the consequences of that? Well, hear him out. Hear him out. What are the consequences of that?
More of the same, more of what we don't like, more decaf politics.
So 6 months from there, there's no difference?
No, not really. Well, no. The crucial thing is, will he have the nerve to do the constitutional reform question? Which, as I've said to him in arguments, I've said, look, if you say you'll abolish the hereditary principle in the House of Lords, if you say you'll devolve the United Kingdom, you're faced inevitably with the question, are we going to be a republic or a monarchy?
Well, that's
are we going to be a European republic? He's terrified of the implications of his own politics, but he can't back off from them either.
I know, but I think that you're making this discussion sexy.
Who is?
He is. You know, he's trying to bring the royal family, Lady Di, into it. He's a real populist, is Christopher. Let's get back to this. The point is that if he does, which I expect he will do, carry out the things which he said, it won't simply be a kind of decaffeinated society in the way Chris is painting kind of palette. You underrate the fundamental difference that the European Convention on Human Rights makes to people's daily lives, to personal liberty. In England, the law courts have always upheld the rights of property against personal rights because we have no Bill of Rights. That is profound. The devolution, if carried out as said, is quite profound. They are not minor matters, these. They are radical.
But Blair
I
supported
think the
Major's...
essential message.
Yeah.
He may not be Clinton. He may be Dukakis. It's competence, not
Really?
ideology.
You-
It is. I'm going to manage the government. I'm not going to lead the country off of a cliff. I'm going to be competent. You said it before. You said you don't think that there are going to be dramatic initiatives in the first 6 months.
Beyond what he's already
I don't think
promised.
that there are going to be
beyond what he's
dramatic initiatives in either there or here over the next few years, as long as the economies keep on humming
Let me just come
along.
to campaigning style and come right back. Campaign style, you said on this program in 1991, following Bill Clinton, the best politician you'd seen since John F. Kennedy. Yes, you remember that?
I don't know whether it was John F. Kennedy. It might have been Ed Koch. But
No, it wasn't. It was John F. Kennedy. I remember. We got tape.
He was
So my question is...
Let's see the tape.
All right. My question is,
Blair's-
how good a campaigner is Blair, and does he remind you of Clinton as a campaigner, as someone who has a... No.
He uses a lot of the same phrases because
New, fresh, dynamic.
Community
He's
responsibility.
stolen all the same phrases. If you watch news clips, you can see they use exactly the same. So much for all these fresh ideas.
But
He's
he
just stolen
is-
all Clinton's speeches.
It's like the meddler.
Yeah, he's a hopeless.
So what
He's-
The
he's
guy
not-
in the
he's-
first few days in office, I tell you what he'll do. He'll ride up and down the Mall in these new government limos, playing with the electric buttons. That's all he's going to do. He's going to do very little in the way.
So
of
you have no
policy.
confidence of great change coming to...
I have no particular confidence in him. You're right.
All right.
But the main thrust of government will be decided.
You have just enunciated Tony Blair's most profound argument for being elected. No great change, except for the fact that I'm not going to be the other guys.
But the main government is going to be done by
That's
Wall
not a
Street
great mission.
and by probably Alan Greenspan will be president not only of the United States but of Britain as well.
So what do we make of Rupert Murdoch, your former boss, endorsing Tony Blair?
Well, I expected he would do that because he's very shrewd. He doesn't normally ride against the prevailing politician. And in this case, he's hedged his bets by two of his newspapers endorsing the Labour Party and the others endorsing the Conservative Party, more or less.
Yeah.
So he's hedged his bets. I'm not surprised by that. I think it's a calculated decision. I don't deplore it.
Blair flew all the way to Australia to meet with Murdoch and, as it were, wait upon him at his court.
People
went a long way out of his way to
People
solicit
say
this.
that Mr. Murdoch, my esteemed employer, for another few hours, has never really...
Until he sees this broadcast.
Has never, no,
Speak for
actually,
England,
I am,
speak for England.
But he's never really got over Lady Thatcher's demise politically, and that people say that he could never quite accept Mr. Major because Mr. Major wasn't Mrs. T, and that's really what Mr. Major's main fault has been, not only in the eyes of Mr. Murdoch, but a lot of his opponents.
In the end, did the Tory party make a mistake in dumping Mrs. T?
I think it was getting a little bit of a joke. I think it was probably time.
All right.
No,
One.
biggest mistake they ever made.
Well, I don't think she'd have won another election.
Serious mistake, and you were right in what you said earlier. I've heard several of Blair's people say that they think their historic mission is to finish what she began, and that they consider themselves to be Thatcherites. And it's the only way of being revolutionary in
I'm
Britain
out of
now.
time.
She would
Harry,
have she would have had a more consistent campaign than Major had. She wouldn't have wobbled as he did. She'd have gone straight down the line, like it or lump it. And I therefore think she'd have been more effective.
She isn't a
One last quick question, because we're out of time. Do I hear from the four of you that the issue of Europe is dead and gone?
No, I think this is fundamentally important. And I rejoice in the fact that Blair will win and will not go to Europe bearing a meat axe in the way that Mrs. Thatcher did.
Or the way Major would have gone in the end.
And Britain owes its prosperity to European relationships. There's absolutely no question about it. And these little Englanders like Major or those Goldsmith crowd who want to be isolationists are totally wrong.
All right. On that note, Harry, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Christopher. Coming up, another Brit, Janet McTeer, who is an extraordinary star on the stage at the Belasco Theatre, starring in Doll's House. Back in a moment.